Landing on My Heart Chapter 6, but lately Louis Fu has had a headache. 3 years ago, when major airlines signed the ACJ-31 procurement contract with Huawei, it began to plan to train pilots of the corresponding models, and deliver the pilots when the aircraft was delivered. In layman's terms, sell you airplanes and sell you train drivers. Since ACJ-30 is the first passenger aircraft independently developed by Huawei, it has not yet been launched and has attracted much attention, and it is also under great pressure, so the training of pilots is particularly strict. This batch of pilots brushed off tens of thousands of people after preliminary screening alone, and then fought round by round in the perverted elimination rate of the flight academy. But even so, the pilots who successfully graduated are divided into 3, 6, and 9 levels. So as early as 2 months ago, the major airlines started a pilot scramble, and everyone wants the best pilots, because they are one of the strongest guarantees of aviation safety. At this stage, the best ones have been carved up. However, just as there is a champion in the college entrance examination every year, the flight academy will have one best student in each class. At this moment, only the best trainee left does not know who will go to him. President Fu, there is no negotiation. The new secretary, Bai Yang, walked into Louis Fu's office with a puzzled expression. The intention of the best student is Bai Heng. Did he say why? Louis Fu asked. The best student in this period, the flight record is beautiful, every exam has beaten the same period, even the instructors have repeatedly praised the rare sight of such a tough student, in order to cause fierce snatching among various families. Nope, Bai Yang replied, we have given the best conditions within the acceptable range, and they will definitely not be worse than Bai Heng, but she still chose Bai Heng, it seems to be a personal wish. Louis Fu raised his hand, put 2 fingers against his forehead, and sighed. This way, Louis Fu said, Vice President who is also on a business trip there, and tomorrow you and Vice President who will go in person. Bai Yang straightened his collar and immediately went out to book tickets. Early the next morning, a call came from the flight academy. Louis Fu had just arrived at the company and was hurrying through the corridor, and the administrative secretary brought coffee and rested quietly at Louis Fu's desk. President Fu, it seems that it still can't work. Bai Yang on the other end of the phone was no longer tempered. She said that the Bai Heng plain meal is delicious. What is the reason? Our first-class chef is Michelin level. This is a joke. Louis Fu stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and asked, where are you now? Just outside their office of the Academic Affairs Office, Vice President who is still inside. Let him answer the phone and I'll talk to him. Bai Yang was stunned and said yes. Louis Fu took a sip of coffee, and the other end of the phone changed, but he didn't make a sound. Hello, Louis Fu spoke first, I am Louis Fu, Director of Operations of Hengshi Aviation. The other end of the phone still stopped for a moment before he heard a fluttering Mr. Fu is good, female. Louis Fu for a meal. Suppressing his brief surprise, Louis Fu turned and walked towards the desk, convenient to ask, which conditions of the World Airlines are you not satisfied with? The person over there lazily spoke, there is nothing dissatisfied, that is, Bai Heng's catering is delicious. Louis Fu felt that he was also a pity, and he could maintain a good temper for the reason for taking Joe like this. This is simple. If you have a need, you can let the chef prepare the meal for you alone before each flight. That's a lot of trouble. No trouble, any other ideas? On the other end of the phone, the conditions were listed one by one, and it took more than 20 minutes to say. It's not tricky, Louis Fu can still accept it. While calling, Louis Fu opened the pilot details folder on his computer, sorted them according to the flight record score, found the highest one, and saw a photo in the image column. The pilot is particular about his body shape, so he attached a full body photo. The person above was wearing a cadet uniform, a straight white shirt, and straight black suit pants. She was slender and straight, standing under the wings, looking radiant and having an excellent temperament. It seems to be plain face. Louis Fu zoomed in on the photo and saw a face without powder. His gaze froze for a moment, and he always felt a hint of familiarity. But this feeling flashed and was denied by himself. If he had seen this woman, he would have been impressed. Mr. Fu, are you still listening? If I think it's too much, let's forget it, I have nothing to do with World Airlines. What? Louis Fu clicked the mouse and turned off the photo. The signal was bad just now, I didn't hear it clearly. The head seemed to chuckle. I said, I want double my annual salary. Louis Fu opened his mouth and said, good. This time it was the turn of the person on the other end of the phone to be stunned. I didn't expect him to be so cheerful. Are there any other conditions? No, so, happy cooperation. The other side changed his tone, seemed to have come back to his senses, and said, President Fu, do you really want me to come? Louis Fu didn't know why she said that, but she felt that her patience today was really amazing. Maybe he couldn't get used to Bei Hong's little banquet who had never dealt with him. But the silhouette under the plane flashed in his mind. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Then I'll think about it again. It seems to be a little reluctant. The phone hung up, and Louis Fu's hand remained in the posture of answering the phone, stunned for a while. Could it be that World Airlines has a bad reputation in pilot circles? It is logically impossible, and World Airlines is definitely the industry leader in employee benefits. Louis Fu put down his phone and thought for a while, not knowing what was wrong. While waiting, he opened his resume again. As soon as the mouse pulled over the photo, the bell rang again. Or a call from Bo Yang. Louis Fu paused for a moment and picked up the phone, but it was Bai Yang talking on the other side. Anything else? At this moment, Bai Yang ran to the corridor outside again, and said in a low voice, President Fu, have you thought clearly? Double the annual salary, although the salary is kept secret, but it is not good to let other pilots know. I know, then. Keep an eye on the contract. Louis Fu said, another annual salary goes to my account. But, don't be verbose. Louis Fu didn't want to talk to him much. When the time comes, you will draw up a double contract, and the other reward contract will be counted as my personal gift, and the tax will go to my account without the hands of the finance department. But she said she still had to think about it. It's okay, let her think about it. Louis Fu loosened a suit button and rubbed his brow bone. Fast forward to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 7 hours after the call ended. Louis Fu never felt that 7 hours was so long. He was sitting in a conference room, and a group of people were discussing the planning of ACJ-31's first flight, which gave him a headache. During this period, he looked at Bai Yang twice and pointed to his mobile phone, meaning to ask if there was any call from the flight academy, and Bai Yang shook his head. At this time, the meeting had come to an end, and the people in the planning department below looked at Louis Fu, waiting for him to give instructions. Louis Fu had 3 proposals in front of him, one by one, but his eyes did not fall on them at all. The entire conference room was silent for 3 seconds, and everyone looked at Louis Fu with trepidation. He didn't seem to have listened to what they said at all, and his expression at this time was like writing, "You are not worthy of the ACJ-31 aircraft that Lao Tzu paid a lot of money for" on his face. Just when everyone thought that he was going to get up and leave directly, he suddenly spoke. P1 Group, 40 minutes of media coverage, no focus. How much flow control will be delayed at the airport by wasting such a long time? In the P2 group, the propaganda is boring, the expression is straightforward, the focus is vague, and the choice of media channels is also unreasonable. P3 group, there is no effective publicity concept, multiplied by resources, cross-border creativity, strong implementation. These 3 points cannot be done, do not submit the plan. The conference room was silent for a while, and the needles could be identified. Dismissal. Louis Fu pushed open the proposal in front of the door, got up and said, resubmit the plan next week. Everyone watched Louis Fu go out with bated breath, and the 3 team leaders came back with black faces to collect their things. Someone asked Bai Yang in a low voice, President Fu is in a bad mood today. Bai Yang smiled helplessly, did not speak, and chased out in 2 steps. At this time, the mobile phone finally rang. Bai Yang stopped to answer, and after a few seconds, his expression gradually relaxed. The person in front felt Bai Yang's pause, turned around, and Bai Yang gestured at him with an okay gesture. Louis Fu looked sideways at the blue sky outside the glass window and loosened a suit button. The contract was drawn up quickly, and within a few days it came down, and Bai Yang specially showed it to Louis Fu. He had no opinion after reading it, and Bai Yang sent it to the flight academy. This piece of hard bone can be regarded as gnawed down. Bai Yang rubbed his shoulders, and said, only women and villains are difficult to raise, so people are not deceived. At this time, the banquet manager of Beihang came to call. Louis Fu, what crooked trick did you make to snatch my people away? Your people. Louis Fu got up and smiled easily. Is the contract signed your person? The 2 companies are leaders in the industry, competing and complementing each other, and they know each other. Yen and used full force in this matter, found someone to talk about career planning, and used the pilots most concerned about the captain condition as bait. Because he thought too decently, he never expected Louis Fu to directly smash it with money. Yen sneered angrily, okay, don't fight with you about this. Anyway, now that the person is yours, you can tell me, what did you rely on to get away? Louis Fu, by charisma. Yenin didn't even roll his eyes, and directly brushed the phone. Louis Fu put down his phone and walked to the window, his brows stretched, and he felt comfortable looking at the endless rain outside. Suddenly remembering something, he turned back and asked, when will ACJ-31 come over? Bai Yang said, the air traffic control side has been arranged, the first plane will take off at 4 o'clock on Saturday morning, and if nothing goes wrong, it will land at Jiangqing International Airport on time at 6:14. Louis Fu nodded and asked again, what about her? Bai Yang was stunned for a moment before he reacted to who Louis Fu said she was. The flight academy said that it would not waste every opportunity to fly in the back seat, so this time she would fly with her. But the personnel office and logistics office were not working on Saturday, and she would officially join on Monday. Louis Fu turned around and sat down, opened a document in front of him, and suddenly said, what time is the plane to Huicheng this Saturday? This Bai Yang couldn't remember clearly. He took out his mobile phone and looked at it, and said, 7 o'clock in the morning. Louis Fu said lightly, On Saturday, the sky was just dawning, and the east was white. The weather was not good today, and the clouds and waves were churning in the lower places, blocking the light of daystar. Very few flights depart and land at this time, which is the clearest time of day at the airport. The lounge was crowded, but surprisingly quiet, with the occasional sound of flipping through papers, adults looking at their phones or napping, and a few children playing and sleeping in their parents' arms. Louis Fu and Bai Yan and 2 assistants hurried through the corridor and straight to the gate. There was already a long queue ahead, but the first-class aisle was still empty, waiting for the last first-class guest to board. Louis Fu looked up at his watch, paused in his steps, and turned his head to look out the window. The large floor-to-ceiling windows of the terminal provide an unobstructed view of the apron. Even the indicator signs on the ground are clear. At this moment, an aircraft broke through the clouds in the sky, the wings split the air, and it fell majestically, landing smoothly in the center of the runway at an 8-degree inclination, all the way. Even though the terminal was isolated from the rumbling sound, the aviation people seemed to have an intuition, and a group of flight attendants pulling the flight case tacitly stopped and hurriedly stopped to watch, and several passengers sitting by the window also looked back curiously. I saw that the plane on the runway was covered in snow white as the background, and the fuselage was sprayed with a hieroglyph-shaped golden phoenix. Its wings were randomly extended, and the phoenix tail was raised high in the tail, arrogant. Louis Fu glanced at his watch again. 6:14, not a single difference. A shallow smile appeared in his eyes, and he actually stood here until the moment when the plane was parked on the tarmac. Bai Yang looked at the time and said, President Fu. Louis Fu looked sideways at him and raised his eyebrows. Bai Yang cleared his throat. Well, there is still time. While speaking, a child in the departure hall shouted, Dad. What kind of plane is that? So beautiful. The child's father was really an expert, holding him to the window. This is our country's own plane. Did you see that golden phoenix? In the future, I will see that there is this is the ACJ-31 model, but it is amazing, such a low cloud can automatically land, and... The father's tirade was interrupted by the child's shout, Wow, the pilot is down. As Louis Fu could see, the plane passenger ladder car had already set up the gangway, and the captain sent by World Airlines was the first to walk out. The view from the window was wider, and Louis Fu walked over slowly. Bai Yang and the 2 assistants behind looked at each other, did not dare to say more, and followed. After all, who wouldn't want to see more planes they paid a lot of money for? Louis Fu looked at the hatch. The captain had already stepped down a few steps, and the co-pilot followed closely. Both Louis Fu knew each other, and it was the modified crew he personally finalized to send to training. And when the third man came out, Louis Fu narrowed his eyes. The wind on the tarmac was strong, whistling, blowing the hair on her cheeks, fluttering before her eyes, and blowing up her white uniform shirt. She did not rush down the stairs, but took off her flight cap, clamped it between her arms, stood in place, raised her head and looked around, and her gaze finally fixed on the 6 big characters of Jiangqing International Airport. Wow, is that a sister? The child shouted again, is she a flight attendant? Why is she wearing different clothes? The child's father smiled and put him on his shoulder, making his vision wider. Haha, that's also a pilot, a female pilot. Dad was also meeting a female pilot for the first time. The child's voice attracted the attention of several passengers next to him, and gradually some people stood by the window to look at the specially shaped plane. As if there was an invisible attraction pulling, Louis Fu unconsciously took a step forward, less than 30 centimeters away from the glass. He watched intently as she walked towards the terminal, her figure becoming clearer and clearer. Her black trousers were blown by the wind and hugged her legs, and every step was clean. The captain seemed to be saying something to her, and she tilted her head sideways, every bright smile spreading around, obscuring the presence of the co-pilot on the side. Suddenly, she looked up at the terminal and looked straight over. She knew that she was just looking at the entire terminal, but the illusion of gaze meeting that staggered the space still made Louis Fu's breathing tighten once. President Fu. The radio is already urging boarding. Bai Yang suddenly spoke on the side. Louis Fu nodded and turned to walk towards the gate. After a few steps, he paused again, looked back at the tarmac, but saw a crew car slowly driving into the distance. Landing on My Heart Chapter 7. The two ACJ-31s assigned to the Jiangqing base caused heated discussions in Hengshi Airlines for a while, although everyone had seen pictures in the promotional video before, but they were still deeply shocked to see the shape of the aircraft with their own eyes. There is still a week before the first flight of ACJ-31. Many domestic flight attendants began to stare at the background of the intranet. After all, the significance of the first flight is not ordinary. There must be media interviews. Jiang Ziyue is the most calm of the pursers. She went to Wang Lekang's office a few days ago to get the flight mission book, and when she bent down, she saw her name in the folder, so she was ready to go to Spain for a vacation with Captain Yu. It was also a small holiday for her to switch from an international flight to a domestic flight. Ni Tong still doesn't understand this, how good international flights are, long holidays, high salaries, and can play all over the world, unlike her who has been flying 4 times in this field, and feels that she has never seen anything in the world. But people are now in love with Captain Yu, and they are about to get engaged, and it is normal to want to return to the family. With such a fiancé, maybe in a few years she will quit her job to become a full-time wife. Speaking of the captain, Ni Tong suddenly sent a message to Jiang Ziyue. Master, do you know that ACJ-31 and the pilot who flew over today are a woman? Ni Tong has heard about things, how could Jiang Ziyue not hear about it? You know, what's wrong? The master was so calm, Ni Tong suddenly felt that he was making a fuss. Look at how calm people are. Ah, nothing, just talk about it, you have a good trip. Seeing that Jiang Ziyue had no desire to chat, Ni Tong could only give up and continue to go back to the house to drink with his friends. The next morning, before the sun came out, a lingering drizzle woke up the city. It is always like this when returning to the southern sky. There is always a mist in the air that cannot be dispersed, and the clothes washed cannot be dried. Fortunately, Cecile Ruan had just returned to Jiangqing, and before his clothes could be put into the cabinet, the intimate clothes he wore this day were still neatly stored in the box, and he could wear them when he took them out and ironed them. And the house she rented is a high-end apartment that was just handed over last year, and it is well done to prevent moisture, and there is no moisture on the walls. And because it is close to the airport, many airline executives and captains have a temporary residence here, and the captain who drove the plane back with her that day lived here. It was still cold, so Cecile Ruan took a sweatshirt and put it on his head, and when his head came out, his hair stood up. Seeing herself like this, Cecile Ruan couldn't help but roll her eyes at the mirror. If you think about it, you are really cruel to yourself. When I first entered the flight academy, the daily physical training was so perverted that several men couldn't eat it. Especially when it comes to fixed roller training, in which people are placed in an iron frame and rotated in circles, accelerating again and again. Cecile Ruan also vomited at first, and stumbled back to the dormitory not to only rinse his mouth, but also wash the dirt. Later, she found that she spent a lot more time than other male trainees just to get her hair every day, so she resolutely sat down at the barber shop. She has raised this thick and silky long hair for more than 10 years, and under her careful care, even if the curly hair is permed, it is not knotted or split, so even the barber touches this hair over and over again, and reluctantly asks, "Girl, do you really want to cut it?" Cecile Ruan nodded and said cut. Then hearing the click of the scissors, Cecile Ruan closed his eyes and gasped, his eyebrows trembling slightly. A few scissors went down, strands of long hair fell to the ground, the weight on his head became lighter and lighter, and Cecile Ruan's eyes closed tighter and tighter. When she opened her eyes, she saw that Chi Er's hair in the mirror almost didn't faint. Let's think I'm a knowledgeable person now. Fortunately, in recent years, hair has grown to shoulder length. Cecile Ruan had just finished recalling the past and was about to go out, when her phone suddenly dripped. She picked it up and saw that it was WeChat sent by Baiyang. Baiyang, you joined the reporting this morning. The two were politely added to WeChat when signing the contract at the flight academy. Cecile Ruan thought that this person estimated a virtue with his boss, and would only lie quietly in her list in this life, but he didn't expect that the person was quite good, and he took the initiative to care. She was about to type when another message came from there. Baiyang, where do you live? Do you want me to drop you up later? Cecile Ruan thought for a moment and asked, are you alone? Baiyang, I'm in Mr. Fu's car, right over the Mingchen apartment. Cecile Ruan, then I'm not going down the road. If it doesn't go well, it won't go well, but that is very spiritual, and Baiyang automatically understood Cecile Ruan's meaning to mean that her route from the famous courtier's apartment to the World Airlines was not smooth. She's not on the route over the Mingchen apartment. Baiyang turned to Louis Fu in the back seat and said. Louis Fu nodded and said nothing. The car slowly stopped at the exit of the community, and when the barrier railing was opened, Louis Fu looked up at the window, and his eyes suddenly froze. Bo Yen saw what Louis Fu was looking at in the rearview mirror and curiously followed his gaze. Who is the woman standing tall by the roadside flower platform, holding an umbrella, seemingly waiting for a car? Not Cecile Ruan. There was a sudden death-like silence in the car. Isn't it not a bad path? Don't you know the four big characters of famous minister's apartment? Baiyang coughed, turned on the iPad, opened a copy of the meeting minutes, handed it to Louis Fu, and pretended that nothing had happened. President Fu, this is the minutes of yesterday's meeting. Louis Fu took the iPad, turned 2 pages, and suddenly said, did you offend people when you went to the flight academy? Baiyang immediately recalled his words and deeds at that time. He felt that he had always been personable, could talk, never blushed with people, and looked quite handsome and handsome. How could he offend people? Before answering, Louis Fu added, pay more attention to your words and deeds in the future, don't lose my face. Baiyang. Okay, the boss said it was his problem, then it must be his problem. Got it, I'll pay attention later. Cecile Ruan paid no attention to the Kian slowly driving away in front of her. She saw that the rain had stopped, put away her umbrella and put it in her bag, and when she looked up again, a taxi slowly pulled over. Cecile Ruan looked at the license plate and confirmed that it was the one he had contracted. Just as she was about to walk over, a woman suddenly popped out and opened the passenger door in front of Cecile Ruan. She moved so much that Cecile Ruan took a step back. Master, go to Hengshi Airlines. Cecile Ruan was stunned by this operation, and immediately grabbed the door that was about to be closed after reacting, sorry, this is the car I called. The woman hurriedly fastened her seatbelt with her head down, not looking at Cecile Ruan. Can you let me go first? I'm in a hurry, I'm going to be late for the meeting soon. Nope, Cecile Ruan pulled the door with one hand and supported the roof with the other. Please get down. Ni Tong tugged on the seatbelt, her eyes were anxious, she was impatient, and she wanted to pull the car door, but found that the woman in front of her was so strong that she couldn't move at all. Ni Tong was so anxious that he couldn't help it, and put his hands together in a pleading, can you wait any longer? Is it okay to help? I really have a very important meeting. In the early hours of this morning, a plane had a safety accident, and World Airlines immediately sent a message to organize a safety seminar, requiring all the flight department and cabin crew of the flight that were not flying to be there. Nope, Cecile Ruan crossed the front door of the car and said in a bad tone, I also have very important things. Cecile Ruan wasn't in a hurry, and if the woman had told her well at first, she would have let her. But as soon as she came to grab the car, then she would not let it die. Please, sister, really, help me this time, can you be kind? After saying that, seeing that Cecile Ruan did not loosen, Ni Tong softened her voice again and tugged on her sleeve. Sister, please, can I help? I had dinner with a few friends last night, drank some wine, and overslept in the morning. The coquettish tone did not impress Cecile Ruan, but caused the driver to laugh. Girl, I am an online car, I can't drive you, otherwise I will violate the law. Ni Tong. Meanwhile, Cecile Ruan shook her phone at her, pouting and smiling as if she couldn't help it. Ni Tong quickly glanced back, did not see a taxi coming, but had to unfasten his seatbelt. As soon as she gave way, Cecile Ruan sat down and slammed the door shut. At that moment, Ni Tong heard the voice automatic broadcast of the driver's mobile phone. I received a passenger with the tail number 6233. and went to Hengshi Airlines from Mingchen apartment. Ni Tong watched the car go away, ate a mouthful of car exhaust, and stomped his foot in anger. What kind of person this is? Fortunately, soon another taxi came. Ni Tong stopped it and asked the driver to step on the accelerator along the way, which can be regarded as arriving before the specified time. It's just that she didn't expect to see the woman just now at the elevator entrance of the Hengshi Aviation Headquarters building. Cecile Ruan was also surprised. She glanced sideways at the woman standing next to her waiting for the elevator with her, and she really had a narrow road. It seems that it will be a colleague in the future. Coincidentally, you still caught up. Ni Tong didn't expect that he didn't speak, but the person next to him spoke first. It is also interesting, obviously she herself is the next world voyage, and she is not willing to bring a belt in such a hurry, so she has to give her a mouthful of exhaust. Ni Tong was angry, and the words he said were also yin and yang strange. Coincidentally, you also come to the world. Cecile Ruan smiled and nodded. Well, I'll report from the personnel office. Ni Tong raised his eyebrows and looked at Cecile Ruan unabashedly. Just saw the momentum that the 6 relatives did not recognize when she got into the car, and I didn't know that I thought it was the president's wife. The elevator door opened, and Ni Tong was about to enter, but was preempted by Cecile Ruan. Ni Tong really lost his temper, and laughed at the door. You just graduated. Cecile Ruan nodded this time. Ni Tong chuckled, raised his foot and walked in. I'll just say. That is, newcomers who are neither light nor heavy will be like this. 2 people stood at both ends of the elevator. One pressed the personnel office on the 12th floor and the other pressed the conference hall on the 14th floor. Cecile Ruan looked down at her phone, while Ni Tong looked at her with her arms folded. Did you fly with it? Not yet. Ni Tong asked knowingly. The crew who just came in will go through a period of flying time, and the old passenger who takes the flight is the master, and no matter how the position changes in the future, there is a relationship between the seniors and seniors there. Not to mention that she is also a purser. Although it is a little unpleasant on the other side of the apartment, I am a generous person, and there are some things that I have to mention to you. Seeing that Cecile Ruan ignored her, she walked up to her and came face to face with her. Our line is also about seniority. Next you have to enter the stage of taking flight. You will understand something in the future. Know that courtesy is humility. She stretched out her finger and pointed to the elevator door. Even if the elevator is a place, you have to compete for the first place when you turn back to the machine. So what does the master think of you? Let the purser think of you. Cecile Ruan looked up and looked at Ni Tong for a moment. Ni Tong was even more upset in his heart. What to see? And before Ni Tong had a seizure, Cecile Ruan burst out laughing. Ni Tong took a while to come back. Her smile, no matter how she looks at it, has a feeling of IQ reduction looking at children. Ni Tong sighed, thinking that if the words were not explained, this person could not understand. In the future, we will work together and get to know each other formally. Ni Tong stretched out his hand and said solemnly, Purser of the 4th purser, Ni Tong. Cecile Ruan didn't move, his gaze swept from Ni Tong's face to her hand, light and without any emotion. Then he slowly raised his hand to hold it. Flight Department 6th Team ACJ-30 pilot, Cecile Ruan. Ni Tong's hand shook. She looked at Cecile Ruan stunned, seemingly unable to believe what Cecile Ruan said. The elevator dinged and reached the 12th floor. Cecile Ruan withdrew his hand and walked outside. Before the elevator door closed, she turned back and said, By the way, if you fly with me in the future, it is best not to drink alcohol within 24 hours before arriving at work. I absolutely cannot bear the flight attendant being late.
Welcome to Storyverse. If you have any novels you'd like to see or stories you'd like to share, feel free to leave us a comment or send us a private message. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join our community of avid readers and romance enthusiasts.
Landing on My Heart, Chapter 8. It wasn't until the elevator reached the 14th floor that Ni Tong finally came back to his senses. Cecile Ruan. She recited the name several times, and finally remembered at the moment the elevator door closed again. Cecile Ruan is the Cecile Ruan who made her a low-end version. But how could she come back? Or the pilots of the flight department? This shook the kung fu elevator down to the 9th floor, and Ni Tong pressed the floor wildly when he reacted, but unfortunately it didn't help. When she returned to the 14th floor, the safety lecture had begun. Sure enough, it was still late. Ni Tong was upset, swiped his fingerprints on the card maker at the door, and then quietly slipped in through the back door and sat in the corner of the back row. The colleague next to him whispered, "Why are you late?" Ni Tong was irritable, and while grabbing the mobile phone from his bag, he said, "Don't mention it, I'm bored." Found Jiang Ziyua's WeChat, she immediately typed, "Master, Cecile Ruan is back." After the news was sent, she remembered that Jiang Ziyue had gone on vacation to Spain a few days ago, and it should have just taken off. The colleague next to him was still talking. "You didn't see it, just now Wang Lekong saw that you were absent alone in the purser," and his face was black. Putting down the phone, Ni Tong turned his head and asked, "Cecile Ruan is back?" The colleague was stunned. "Who?" The colleague was clearly unaware of this person. Forget it, Ni Tong didn't bother anymore. She just thought, maybe the person just said Cecile Ruan, maybe it was Cecile Ruan, maybe even Cecile Ruan. Anyway, it's not a special name, what if it's the same name and surname? Otherwise, according to Jiang Ziyue, how could Cecile Ruan, who had that happened, return to Hengshi Airlines? Not to mention the flight department under the control of Louis Fu. If you change her, you can't go back to the World Airlines after beating her. While Ni Tong was divergent, Cecile Ruan had already completed the onboarding procedures in the personnel office. Between HR entering intranet information, Cecile Ruan looked up. From the moment she stepped into the World Airlines, she found that a lot had changed. The spacious hall on the first floor is replaced with a large ACJ31 model on the right side, which stands conspicuously like a logo. The reception at the front desk changed from 4 to 6, and the uniform was changed, instead of the black and swarthy blazer of the past. The personnel office was also moved from the original 6th floor to the 14th floor. And along the way, Cecile Ruan didn't see a familiar face, but she didn't meet many people. "I'm okay here." HR promised 2 large and 1 small lists to Cecile Ruan. The small one is your internet account and work number, and then this is the process sheet. You take it to the flight department to report and stamp, and then go to the logistics department to get the uniform. Cecile Ruan thanked her and walked out of the office with her things in hand before she began to look at her new job number. In fact, until now, she can still recite her original work number, but the letters on her head have changed. World Airlines is issued by the crew with the initials of the company's organizational structure, headed by the board of supervisors, and the head of the cabin crew is E. And now her work number has become D, the flight department. The division of the flight department, HR, was a young girl who quietly looked at Cecile Ruan from time to time when she was stamped, and there were 2 shallow pear swirls at the corners of her mouth. "It's the first time I've seen a female flyer." The girl's hand movements were neat, and she kept signing and sealing, but it did not affect her small talk, and it is also an ACJ31 model. "I heard that this badge is so powerful, and several of the companies recruited by our company have to be the chief captain reserve in other companies." She looked at Cecile Ruan shyly. "You're still the best student, you're amazing." After speaking, he took out his mobile phone again. "Let's add a WeChat, private, is it okay?" "Yes." Cecile Ruan pulls out her cell phone, only to notice an incoming call. The screen directly displays the number, which shows that it is not an acquaintance. But Cecile Ruan is sensitive to numbers, and this string of numbers is no stranger and should have been contacted recently. "I'll take a call first." HR smiled and nodded. You take it, I still have a lot of things to enter here." Cecile Ruan walked out with her phone and turned right to a glass gallery. This corridor connects the international conference room of the flight department and the administration department, 7 or 8 meters wide. Daylight shines through the integrated glass, revealing a cold feeling, reflecting a sense of technology. Cecile Ruan always felt that the atmosphere here was a bit like a certain place, but he couldn't remember it for a while. "Hello, who?" "Miss Ruan, I'm Yenin." "Oh, Yenin, the banquet manager of Beihang Airlines, contacted her with this number some time ago." "Hello Mr. Yen, is there anything wrong with me?" "It's okay, I just want to ask, did you report your death? If it is not reported, do you want to think about it again?" He spoke with a bit of ruffle, somewhere in the middle of hanging and ridicule, completely different from Louis Vu's serious and indifferent tone. "It sounds like a joke, so it's easy to relax. Unfortunately, I am now in the personnel department of the World Airlines, and I have entered the personnel information, Mr. Yen. Thank you for your kindness." Alas, Yenin sighed heavily. "Then Miss Ruan, I'm really curious. I remember that you were obviously going to sign a contract with us at that time. Why did you finally choose World Airlines?" Why? Cecile Ruan specifically counted the decimal point 3 times when he signed the contract. Her current salary, just by paying taxes, is almost catching up with her salary when she was a flight attendant. Who can't get by with money? Not to mention that half of them went to Louis Fu's account. Thinking of the way he begged for money, Cecile Ruan felt that his cells were relaxed. Double the annual salary, 10 times the joy. But you can't say that, cheesy. This, Yenin then asked indifferently, what kind of soul soup did Louis Fu pour into you? Did he seduce you with beauty? Anyway, the person has been snatched away. Yenin does not do senseless struggle, but is a little interesting to this woman herself, and does not unconsciously bring a bit of ridicule when speaking. Cecile Ruan probably also heard the meaning of Yenin, and said with a smile, why did President Yen say that? The person on the other end of the phone became more and more relaxed, twisting acid, and said, isn't it, Louis Fu usually uses that face to swagger, and there is no harm to the little girl. But no, he must have woken up every morning and looked in the mirror and felt handsome. Cecile Ruan's mind inexplicably appeared Louis Fu's self-pitying look in front of the mirror, and he couldn't help but want to laugh. President Fu, after all, a talent, Yushu Linfeng, and extraordinary chi. Halfway through the words, she looked at the LED screen reflecting a huge group of people, and the one at the head. But Cecile Ruan's brain circuit is not broken, and she is still blowing in her mouth. Gentle and dignified. The figure behind him stood still, and more than a dozen gazes brushed over, with one of them being the most scorching. Cecile Ruan's voice is getting quieter. No, it wasn't the picture of the reunion she imagined. She originally just wanted to satirize Louis Fu with Yenin, but now she was bumped into by someone. Maybe this person is going to make up her brain again to express her affection. A sharp turn is urgently needed now. Mary, uninhibited, none of this has anything to do with him. The last sentence, through the ground, suddenly took a turn, caught the people who stopped to listen by surprise, and for a moment collectively hoped that they were deaf. They quickly turned around, pretended not to hear anything, and continued walking, albeit with slightly stiff steps. The glass corridor remains only Cecile Ruan, who faces the wall, Louis Fu, who faces her behind, and Bai Yang, who is looking at her nose, and 4 assistants. The long glass corridor seems to have a dark wind blowing through. Cecile Ruan remembered that she had thought it was cold like a morgue. On the phone, Yenin smiled presumptuously. Miss Ruan, you really tell the truth, I like your unique vision. The call in Cecile Ruan's ear suddenly stopped, and a mechanical female voice came from the earpiece, please wait, please don't hang up during the call. At the same time, a male voice sounded behind him. Yenin, have you been idle lately? Without thinking about who was talking, Cecile Ruan didn't look back when he saw an elongated shadow on the ground. In the sparkling daylight, he held his mobile phone to his ear, forced a step forward, and stood side by side with Cecile Ruan, but his eyes did not fall on Cecile Ruan, looking straight out the window. There was no temperature in his voice, and there was a subtle fit with this glass corridor. If you have nothing to do, think about how to deal with the internet celebrity you just broke up with who scolded you on Weibo. Don't harass my people with nothing to do, and don't want to dig into the wall. When he said this, he glanced at Cecile Ruan, gently took it, and withdrew his gaze. Please follow the rules of the industry, otherwise I don't mind cutting off the Bali tourism contract in your hand, and then you can also see if your old man will let you enter the soil decades in advance. After speaking, the phone hung up. Louis Fu turned to look at Cecile Ruan, and the whole action was done in one go, as if Yenin hung up with the phone. His voice softened a lot. Miss Ruan, when we first met, did you have any misunderstanding about me? If he had changed to another woman, looked at Louis Fu, the gentleman's eyes, and felt the eccentricity flowing from the obvious turn in his tone, he might really have fallen on the spot. And Cecile Ruan just wants to roll her eyes. What is a first meeting? Dogman, have you forgotten Cecile Ruan on the Thames? Have you forgotten the woman you waited for all night? Looking at Cecile Ruan's puzzled look, Bai Yang, who had held his breath for a long time, finally had a chance to release, and he stepped forward and said, this is President Fu. Yay, Cecile Ruan took a step back in panic. Did you hear what you just said? I'm sorry, I've heard about it. I don't know if President Fu himself is like this. Louis Fu guessed that Cecile Ruan was going to repeat those 7 idioms to show her vocabulary, so he interrupted her just in time. Who said that? Cecile Ruan paused. A friend who won't be named. Her surname is Nguyen. It seems that he saw through Cecile Ruan's hypocrisy, and Louis Fu automatically blamed Yenin and said bad things about him behind his back, too lazy to care. Just as Bai Yan mentioned the time, Louis Fu lifted his foot and was about to leave. Going, Cecile Ruan is so angry, why did she forget her? So whose face did she hit in the face? She's the Thames girl you once looked down on and now pays for. President Fu. Cecile Ruan suddenly stopped him. Louis Fu stopped and turned around. Anything else? Never mind. Cecile Ruan regretted it the moment she shouted, feeling like a fool, but she always made sharp turns. I'm sorry just now. I shouldn't have said bad things about you after listening to the rumors. I should have really understood you first. Then go on and say bad things about you. His expression relaxed slightly. It's okay. Listen, what an atmosphere, what a gentleman. Those who don't know are going to fall under his suit pants again. Cecile Ruan said, then I'll go first, and I'll get my uniform. Subdue, the photo suddenly appeared in Louis Fu's mind. Cecile Ruan wearing a pilot's uniform, a straight shirt suddenly tucked up at the waist, not a grip, the curve suddenly stretched out gracefully, and the black pants underneath were slender and neat. He nodded and turned away. Speaking of uniforms, Cecile Ruan did not expect Hengshi Airlines to change the system intimately, and issued 2 sets of spring, summer and winter, piled together to have a large bag. Fortunately, the pilots are very physical. Even if Cecile Ruan is a girl, it is not difficult to carry it, but it does not look good in a group of beautiful flight attendants coming and going. So the intimate Baiyang appeared at this time. He smiled and took Cecile Ruan's bag. I'll come. The two met at the flight academy, and Cecile Ruan liked him very much, thinking that he was not stained with those stinks as Louis Fu's secretary, so he smiled at him. Thank you, you're welcome. Baiyang led her out. President Fu called me here, saying that there are many uniforms, and girls have a hard time carrying. Cecile Ruan. Mr. Fu is so good, I am so moved. Baiyang, well, I will convey my thanks for you. Who asked you to convey it? It seems that he is still stained with this brain supplement stinky problem. The two got out of the elevator together, and Baiyang put Cecile Ruan in the car before turning back to the company, which happened to be bumped by Ni Tong, who came out of the meeting. Ni Tong took a picture of her mobile phone and sent it to Jiang Ziyue. You see, it's her. Jiang Ziyue, who was far away in Spain, zoomed in on the photo for a while and came to a conclusion. It's not her. How can she have such a good relationship with the secretary of the vice president? Landing on my heart. Chapter 9. Back home, Cecile Ruan stood long in front of the mirror. Why don't you remember her? Is her face very popular? It's impossible. After thinking about it for a long time, Cecile Ruan can only be attributed to Louis Fu's daily management and brain load, so he entered Alzheimer's disease in advance and be kind to him. The kind Cecile Ruan decided to go and sweat a little. There is no chi that exercise cannot solve. If not, it is not enough exercise. Cecile Ruan's newly rented community has a very good gym, which is a benefit of the property to the owner, which is not open to the public, so there are not many people, and the first time she went today, there were only a few people in the equipment area. Seeing clean towels and mineral water, and a personal trainer who didn't come up to sell, Cecile Ruan felt that he was worth the money. The gym is quiet, with only the occasional sound of dynamic music coming from the dance studio next door. Cecile Ruan followed the rhythm of this music and turned up the hydraulic cylinder step by step, until a male voice interrupted Cecile Ruan. Beauty, add a WeChat. A pair of running shoes appeared in the line of sight, and when I looked up, I saw a man about 27 or 8 looking at her with a smile and no mobile phone in his hand. The rejection in Cecile Ruan's eyes could not be more obvious, but the man laughed and reached out to pat his arm force. Yes, it's really a pilot. This arm strength is really not comparable to ordinary people. Cecile Ruan raised an eyebrow. Who are you? The man turned around, faced Cecile Ruan, and stretched out his hand. Banquet, banquet of feast, safe in. Banquet. Cecile Ruan glanced at him. Although this person looks like a hanger, ordinary people do not dare to come out and swagger with this name. The banquet is always good. While shaking hands with Yenin, she asked, how did you recognize me? Haven't I seen your picture? I noticed when you first came in, and I thought where there was such a coincidence. Yenin leaned on the arm force, looking loose. He glanced at Cecile Ruan's arm and added, but when I saw you playing with this, I was pretty much sure. So, although some people are dressed expensively, they are born with an affinity, and Yenin is obviously such a person. Looking out of tune, but without the slightest shelf, Cecile Ruan unconsciously chatted with him a lot, and learned that he also lived here, and just returned from the headquarters of Beihang today, and it was rare to rest, so he came here to exercise. But what Yenin didn't say was that he only came here occasionally for one night. But it doesn't matter, from now on, he will live here. Speaking of Beihang, Yenin couldn't help but sour Louis Fu. It's a pity, you went to World Airlines, you want to work at Louis Fu, he is a black cut, usually looks at the iceberg like he doesn't like to talk. Once he provokes him, people can't eat and go, you can be careful. Cecile Ruan said yes, with a smile. Yenin saw that she looked relaxed, and she was even more unrestrained, sat down on the belly-curling device next to her, and said, "You were an employee of Huafei before, right? How did you come up with the idea of being a pilot?" Cecile Ruan nodded. "Well, I joined the company 3 years ago, just in time for the deadline for independent recruitment, so I want to try it." "That's good. I know that there are quite a lot of people who have signed up internally in Huafei, but there are very few people in the selection." Yenin touched his chin and suddenly remembered something. "Ouch, we have an assigner from Beihang who turned out to be from Huafei's side. It seems to be the same as you in the flight academy." "Yes, it's Si Xiaozhen, we know each other. Before that, Huafei went together, but later in the flight academy did not pass the assessment, changed to become a dispatcher." "Well, the dispatcher is not bad, the ground captain." Chatting here, Yenin found that he seemed to have delayed Cecile Ruan for a long time, so he got up and left. "Then you continue. I still have some business, go first." Cecile Ruan nodded and got up and walked to another piece of equipment. Yenin turned back and said, "By the way, if you really add a WeChat, you can still be a friend if you can't be a colleague." The two have been chatting back and forth for a few days, and Cecile Ruan naturally will not refuse, telling him that his mobile phone number can search WeChat, and Yenin left with a smile. But Yenin was here to chat with Cecile Ruan, which directly led him to go to the late friend's side. "But it doesn't matter much, anyway, it's all friends getting together, it's not a big deal, it's just a coincidence that several of them are free today." In the top box of Warner Manor in the western suburbs of Jiangqing, only a pale yellow lantern with a suspended ceiling was opened, which absorbed and dissipated most of the rising white smoke in the room, and the characteristic carved screen also had the same function. Yenin pushed open the door, and the first thing that came into view was a table of people playing cards, so he spoke. "Today I feel good, get up someone to let me go." Someone at the poker table looked up at him. "It's good to be late, go aside." Yenin smiled and went around the screen to find the bathroom. There were still several people sitting on the sofa, both men and women, but Yenin saw Louis Fu sitting in the middle at a glance. "Yo, the sun is coming out in the west today, and President Fu's busy people are also here." The light behind the screen was dim. Louis Fu had a cigarette in his mouth, and was leaning over to get the lighter on the table. When he heard this, he paused for a moment, raised his chin, and glanced at Yenin inadvertently. At this time, the woman next to her cleverly pressed the lighter, leaned forward with her upper body, and sent the jumping fire to Louis Fu. Louis Fu glanced at her. His gaze was the same as looking at Yenin, without any emotion. The woman looked at Louis Fu nervously, her hands trembled, and the fire flashed slightly. He eventually tilted his head, and with a gentle inhale, the cigarette butt lit up with a red flame, which gradually spread and became brighter as he inhaled, as if it illuminated his entire face. It also illuminated the woman's eyes, and a smile appeared on her face. But the next second, Louis Fu put the cigarette next to the ashtray while spitting out a white smoke. That cigarette was there and went out little by little. Yenin came out of the bathroom and found a seat, right next to Louis Fu. He glanced at the woman next to Louis Fu. "Yo, Mr. Fu's girlfriend." Louis Fu turned his back to the woman and passed a look to Yenin. Yenin didn't react for a while, and looked at the woman twice. Before reminiscing, Louis Fu was probably saying, "You think I like plastic surgery as much as you do? This is insulting." Yenin thinks how he has grown recently. Just next to the card table, Zhu Dong's girlfriend pointed to Yenin. "Don't talk nonsense, you, that's my friend, who came to play by the way today. By the way, introduce, she's Xiaoyi, you know." As soon as the sister-in-law said this, some people around laughed softly. Who doesn't know that Yenin likes internet celebrities the most, and no one in the circle knows better than him about the 2 or 3 things between internet celebrities. But Yenin did not pay attention to the ridicule of others. He stretched his neck to look over at the moment he heard the 3 words Xiaoyi, and looked at it unabashedly, until Xiaoyi was embarrassed. Yenin reacted that he was rude, and coughed twice to show embarrassment. Knowing is knowing, but how does this look different from the photo? Louis Fu next to him saw his shock, smiled at him rarely, and then got up to watch the battle at the card table. In this way, Yenin sat with Xiaoyi. Here's what it means. Yenin and Xiaoyi looked at each other, and the latter smiled friendly, but his gaze soon fell on Louis Fu's back again. Yenin sneered at Louis Fu's back, also walked over, and stood next to Louis Fu again, leaning on Zhu Dong's shoulder. Out of 4 tubes, can you play cards? Won't you just get up and let me fight, mister? Fu, are you playing? How about we go play 2 games of billiards? Louis Fu lit a cigarette, always in the same tone that was too lazy to pay attention to him, not interested. I see that sister in the back is quite interested in you. Yes, Louis Fu answered, saw Xiaoyi and Zhu Dong's girlfriend holding hands and went out, and looked back at him when they went out. Louis Fu only didn't see this eye wave, and when the person went out, he said, I don't want to appear on the entertainment news with the name of the internet celebrity, and after the breakup, I was picked up by fans and scolded and then confiscated the car keys by the old man at home. There was another laughter at the table. Yenin was used to being ridiculed by Louis Fu, sneered again, ignored him, bent down and hooked Zhu Dong's neck, and said, by the way, I recently knew a female pilot, then I tell you, more beautiful than those female stars, actually a pilot you dare to believe. Louis Fu's eyes flashed slightly, his index finger bent slightly, and he flicked off a piece of soot. As soon as he heard the pilot who was more beautiful than a female star, the attention of several men at the card table was still on the hard mahjong. Really fake. Let's take a picture. Yenin touched out his mobile phone, his eyes were full of pride. Okay, I'll flip through the circle of friends. If I can find a female flying as a wife, my old man will wake up laughing, and it is estimated that he will go to the ancestral hall to kneel and thank the ancestors for blessing. Zhu Dong straightened the card and glanced at Yenin. Yes, the action is fast. Yesterday I was almost scolded by your ex-girlfriend on the hot search, and today I got the WeChat of Nufei. But people are women who can go to heaven, can they see you? Yenin raised his eyebrows, and his fingers slid quickly. That's not necessarily, oh yes, President Fu is really powerful, and he snatched this person away from our Beihang abruptly. As he spoke, he turned his head to look at Louis Fu. Mr. Fu, you robbed my people, can't you still stop free love? Yen and this person is knowing that he will only get a touch of Fu's sneer, but he still said so. Maybe that's true. Yenin only didn't hear Louis Fu's words, and continued to flip through his phone. Yo, there are no selfies in the circle of friends. Hey, real beauty is like this, usually don't take pictures. A few people laughed and booed. Anyway, knowing his morality, which girlfriend usually does not blow like this? Only Louis Fu quietly dropped his gaze on the screen of Yenin's mobile phone. He quit WeChat, searched for a long time in the mailbox, and finally found the resume sent to him by the assistant, then downloaded the first one, slid down to the middle, opened the picture, and handed the mobile phone to the middle of the card table. Look, don't say I'm bluffing you. Several lines of sight were fixed on the mobile phone at the same time, and there was an extreme silence in the box, and the men's hormones were smoked by cigarettes. In this minute and second of amazement, Zhu Dong preemptively snatched the mobile phone. It was not enough to look at it twice. 2 fingers were about to enlarge the photo, and his girlfriend walked in with Xiaoyi. Before the person could speak, Zhu Dong threw away his mobile phone with a strong desire for survival and shouted, you guys are playing cards, are you still playing? Yenin rolled her eyes, and was about to take back her mobile phone, but was caught by the person on the other side, and raised an eyebrow at Louis Fu. Don't you come to see? Louis Fu put one hand in his pocket, did not take care of it, and turned and walked towards the sofa. The man smiled and lowered his head to enlarge the picture, looked at it for a long time, and sighed, this temperament is amazing, and it looks so good in uniform. By the way, who are the uniform's controllers here? Zhu Dong, don't you take a closer look. I remember you were a uniform controller. With his girlfriend present, Zhu Dong flew over with an eye knife. Don't talk nonsense, when did I subdue the control? Turning his gaze to Louis Fu again, a group of people looked over, surrounded by deliberately suppressed laughter. Louis Fu, in the center of his gaze, calmed his eyes and bent down to extinguish the cigarette butt. That night, Cecile Ruan was lying in bed with a mask on when she received a friend request to add a friend. Without indicating the intention, Cecile Ruan could only guess who this person was based on his avatar and name. But who calls women a natural sixth sense? Cecile Ruan only looked at it for a moment to know who it was. Cecile Ruan sighed, and the circle of friends that has not bubbled for 10,000 years finally has new content. Why doesn't the WeChat friend application system add a reject option? It's a pity that the word refusal cannot be seen in the opposite direction. It would be nice to add never accept this person's application. Bai Yang, who happened to be brushing the circle of friends, was the first to reply. Bai Yang, maybe to protect the other party's self-esteem, This kind of person ignores his croaking teeth. Cecile Ruan nodded and replied, "What you said makes sense. Like, it seems that I am not as thoughtful as you think. WeChat is too humane." When Bai Yong saw this comment, he didn't hold back his laughter. His gossip heart was aroused, and he wanted to type and continue talking, but he didn't even notice Louis Fu talking to him on the side. It wasn't until the gaze on the side looked over coolly that Bai Yong sensed that something was wrong, and said sarcastically, "President Fu, what did you just say?" The car was driving at high speed, the neon light and darkness outside the window. Louis Fu's eyebrows were slightly hanging, and he was already extremely impatient. It can only be said that fortunately, he really didn't say anything important, and Bai Yang's distracted appearance is rare. "What are you laughing at?" Bai Yang touched his nose and said in a low voice, "It's nothing. Look at that female flying circle of friends, it's quite personal." I thought Louis Fu just asked casually, and Bai Yang said it casually, but he didn't expect him to ask again, "What's wrong?" Bai Yang handed the phone to Louis Fu and looked at it. Just a glance. Louis Fu's face darkened at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Is it funny? Landing on my heart." Chapter 10. What? He also came to add you WeChat. The next day, at the bar at 10 o'clock at night, Bian Xian shook the wine mixer, smiling so that his eyes narrowed into two crescents. Cecile Ruan raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I didn't pass, and I scolded him in the circle of friends." Si Xiaozhen held a table lamp to her chest and looked at Cecile Ruan in confusion. "So, he really doesn't remember you?" Cecile Ruan hummed softly and grabbed a handful of popcorn and shoved them into his mouth. "It's normal not to remember. Flight attendants all have the same uniform and hairstyle, and even the smile is a uniform standard to show 8 teeth, who can tell? And there are so many flight attendants dangling in front of him every day, where does he get so much idle work?" Bian Xian mixed a glass of wine, put it in front of Cecile Ruan, dragged his cheeks and asked, "But you all know that he also lives in the famous courtier's apartment, don't you look for a house again?" Cecile Ruan's eyes widened as if he had heard something fantastical. "Why should I move? I'm all dead and working, is it hypocritical? And he shouldn't live often, close to the airport, just take a break when he's busy. What am I afraid of him doing?" Okay. Bian Xian pointed to the wine glass in front of him and instructed Cecile Ruan, "Send it to table 3. Cecile Ruan clapped his hands and walked with a tray and a glass toward the table at the very edge of the bar lobby. At the beginning of the year, Bian Xian resigned from her job, returned to Jiangqing with her savings from the past few years, realized her dream of opening a small bar, and lived her dream of holding a party by herself. It's just that the bar business is not very good, barely keeping the balance of payments, so even the waiter is not invited, and when the business is good, he will bring his friends to help, and Cecile Ruan has been arrested several times in the past few days when he comes back. The busiest time was concentrated from 10 to 11, and when the other Zhuang being captured by Bian Xian arrived, Cecile Ruan and Si Xiaozhen retired. But this time said that it was not early. Si Xiaozhen thought of working late tomorrow, so she took the opportunity to go to Cecile Ruan's new house to sleep for one night to see what her apartment with a monthly rent of 30,000 looked like. Si Xiaozhen excitedly dragged Cecile Ruan out to show off her driving skills. Seeing the 4 internship stickers on Si Xiaozhen's car, Cecile Ruan suddenly retreated. "How about we take a taxi?" Si Xiaozhen dragged Cecile Ruan into the car and handed over a look of other BB. "Although I can't drive a plane, it's still no problem to drive, don't worry, the 2 departments and 3 have passed." That being said, Cecile Ruan still grabbed his seat belt along the way, straightened his back, watched and listened in all directions, and finally reached the underground parking lot smoothly. "Over there, turn left." The parking space in this community is tight, most of them are private parking spaces. The 2 turned around twice before Cecile Ruan saw a vacant space. "You slow down, the parking space is not large, there are many luxury cars here, you don't scratch and rub." As he spoke, a black car drove opposite, and Si Xiaozhen's hair was about to stand up, another one to grab a parking space. Sick of it. She stared at the parking space, stepped on the accelerator, and before Cecile Ruan could react, she slammed the steering wheel and turned her head towards the parking space, so fast that Cecile Ruan didn't even see the position, and felt a strange friction from the body. "Did you wipe the car next to you?" The parking space had already been grabbed anyway, and Si Xiaozhen stepped on the brakes, only then did he react to what he had done. "No, isn't it?" Cecile Ruan immediately rolled down the window and poked his head out to see that Si Xiaozhen's rear of the car was just crowding the front of the car next to the person, and the whole car was placed diagonally on the rear of the car. Really wiped it. Si Xiaozhen was nervous, her thoughts were chaotic, and she actually drove forward a little. Cecile Ruan felt the friction between the bodies, turned his head and shouted, "Don't move." Si Xiaozhen immediately raised her hands and did not dare to touch the steering wheel again. Her heart plopped. Look at what car I hit. Cecile Ruan gave her a blank look and looked out again. At this glance, Cecile Ruan almost fainted. Although she didn't recognize the logo on the tire, she had basic common sense. Just by looking at the shape of the car, the closed body, the streamlined back, the two-door two-seater, the matte navy blue of the mess, it was over. She looked at Si Xiaozhen faintly. Are you mentally prepared? What? I think it's a sports car that can buy your house 10 times. Si Xiaozhen rolled her eyes, her scalp was numb. She immediately got out of the car, squeezed to the back, and saw a large scratch on the running body and the recesses of her body, and almost fell unconscious on the spot. Me, can I escape? Why don't you say that you can kill yourself directly? Cecile Ruan gave her a blank look, crossed her hands at her waist, and looked around. At this time, the black car that was about to grab a parking space with Si Xiaozhen just now drove over leisurely, and rolled down the window to gloat and laughed. Cecile Ruan glared at him, and the driver was not angry, stepped on the brakes, and said, "Beauty, do you know what kind of car this is? Bugatti Chiron 110th Anniversary Limited Edition, the entire River City is this one." This time, Si Xiaozhen was really going to be unconscious. She held the car door, her legs trembled. "It's over, I'm finished." "Don't panic, you call the insurance company." Cecile Ruan frowned and paced a few steps in place. "How do I contact the owner?" She glanced at Si Xiaozhen and saw that her hands were shaking when she dialed the phone, and she didn't expect her anymore. There is only one big run in the entire Jiangqing. Cecile Ruan suddenly remembered someone, maybe he really knew. She walked to the side, patted the body, and issued it to Yenin with the license plate. "Mr. Yen, there is a little problem with my friend's car in my parking lot. Do you know who the owner of this car is?" The moment it was sent, Cecile Ruan luckily thought that maybe this car was a banquet. "As far as the current contact is concerned, he is a good talker, maybe things will be solved." Within a few minutes, Yenin called directly, and there was even a smell of schadenfreude. "You crashed this car." Hearing this, Cecile Ruan knew that he had thought too much. This was not Yenin's car. "Well, my friend accidentally had something wrong when he grabbed the parking space." Cecile Ruan heard Yenin laugh. How strange the tone sounded. "I really know who this car belongs to, and I didn't want to grab it." After a pause, he said, "Your friend is really lucky." Cecile Ruan suddenly had a sense of foreboding, and his back was cold. "Then Mr. Yen, can you help contact the owner of the car?" Yenin laughed again before slowly saying, "Okay, he shouldn't have slept yet, I'll call him." "Thank you." Hanging up the phone, Cecile Ruan turned to look at Si Xiaozhen, feeling that the person in front of him was already half cold. "What do insurance companies say?" Si Xiaozhen hung up the phone in a hurry, and her voice was hoarse. "They said to come over immediately." "No, but they said that my car was moved, and there was no way to pay all the compensation, maybe 70% of the compensation." "Well, the person in front of me is cold. What about you?" "Now what is the use of being anxious?" Cecile Ruan looked at the Bugatti car marks again and sighed. "The owner will come down immediately." Si Xiaozhen blushed anxiously, grabbing Cecile Ruan's hand. "What should I do?" Cecile Ruan patted her on the shoulder. "It's okay, it's just painted, it shouldn't make you bankrupt, wait for the owner to come." The two stood anxious in the parking lot for 5 minutes, before finally hearing footsteps in the distance. Si Xiaozhen's mood that was finally a little calmer collapsed again. "Here it comes." As the man hurried in, Si Xiaozhen squeezed Cecile Ruan's hand, almost missing her finger. "You calm down, and people will look at you like this for a while." Cecile Ruan looked up, saw the man's appearance, and the words in his mouth stopped abruptly. Si Xiaozhen, who didn't know why, rubbed her eyes and saw that the person was wearing a white shirt and suit pants, and her figure was very good looking. But from a distance, she felt that the person's aura was too terrifying, and before she spoke, she felt that she could be buried in place. Ruan, what should I do?" "You shut up." When the words fell, Louis Fu just looked over. His gaze fell on Cecile Ruan's face, and his footsteps paused. And then it came faster. Don't come here. Cecile Ruan thought to herself, she had poured some blood mold, and a sports car in the whole river city was hit by them, and Louis Fu, one in the world, was provoked by her. You hit the car. Yan Dog Si Xiaozhen was also shocked by the appearance of the person in front of him in this situation. Hello, I didn't mean to. Louis Fu turned to look at the condition of the car, glanced at it casually, and finally his gaze fell on Cecile Ruan. The impatient breath just now has long disappeared, but at this time, it seems that it is not his car that has been hit, and there is a smile at the corner of his mouth. It's quite a coincidence. Here it comes again, and he starts again. It's a coincidence, it's just a coincidence. Not coincidentally. Cecile Ruan said sullenly, whoever crashes will pick a car to hit, and pick a car to hit and not pick you. Louis Fu took 2 steps back and looked at Si Xiaozhen's car again, and put up 4 internship stickers. Si Xiaozhen was embarrassed and scared, her whole face seemed to be burned. I'll pay. It's okay. Louis Fu said, you don't have to pay for it. Not only Si Xiaozhen, but even Cecile Ruan couldn't believe that this was Louis Fu's words. Hello, are you Louis Fu? I'm afraid it's not pierced by the soul, right? Did you call the insurance company? Louis Fu asked again. Si Xiaozhen shook her head frantically, stunned, and nodded frantically. Hit, really? Is it really not necessary for me to compensate? Louis Fu reached out and touched the scratches on his car, glanced at his fingers, and said, it's not serious, you can't afford to pay for it. Si Xiaozhen's face turned even redder. Louis Fu said so, and her guilt was even heavier. And Cecile Ruan, who was frantically rolling his eyes on the side, was coldly cued. Miss Ruan's annual salary is high, but it is possible to afford it. What's the matter with me? Didn't I hit the car again? Si Xiaozhen, who was completely confused, looked at Louis Fu and then at Cecile Ruan. You guys know each other. Cecile Ruan didn't speak. Louis Fu seemed to be thinking about something. His gaze swept lightly over Cecile Ruan, and then said, if it's okay, I'll go first. Just gone. Cecile Ruan and Si Xiaozhen watched in shock as Louis Fu turned and left, not returning to their senses for a long time. Are rich people so talkative? Si Xiaozhen said stunnedly, it turns out that what is written in the novel is real. Cecile Ruan still felt something was wrong, watching Louis Fu's back until he entered the elevator. Ruan, do you know him? Cecile Ruan glanced at him coolly. Yes, I helped you deliver a letter to him. After that, waiting for the insurance company to come over for an hour, Si Xiaozhen has been in a state of split personality. After a while, he said, I think the other person is very good, and he is angry, and he is not angry when he scrapes the car so that he is not angry. After a while, he said, no, this is not right. How can a person like him easily let me go? Shouldn't it be thought that I deliberately wiped his car to get his attention? The 2 statements switched back and forth, and Cecile Ruan finally got overwhelmed. Shut up. Si Xiaozhen obediently shrunk to the side. Cecile Ruan's mood finally improved, and as soon as the insurance company came, he said that he wanted the owner of the other car to come and confirm. Why do you want him to come? He said no need to pay. The people from the insurance company were called over in the middle of the night, and their attitude was not very good. This is the rule. Without the signature of the other party, we can't pay the difference. Si Xiaozhen looked at Cecile Ruan pitifully. Okay, count me on it. Cecile Ruan turned around and sent another message to Yenin, and after waiting for 10 minutes, the other party did not reply. Most of them fell asleep. She went to find Bai Yang again, sent a message, no one replied for a few minutes, brushed the circle of friends, and found that an hour ago he shared a song with the words, good night. Okay, Cecile Ruan looked back at Si Xiaozhen's deadly eyes, took a deep breath, clicked on the friend application page, and passed the application. Mr. Fu's insurance staff still needs you to confirm that you haven't slept, please come down. Cecile Ruan doesn't even want to hit punctuation, while Louis Fu almost seconds back. So you know it's me. Wow, this guy really. Cecile Ruan expressionlessly copied the above sentence twice. Mr. Fu's insurance staff still needs you to confirm that you haven't slept, please come down. Mr. Fu's insurance staff still needs you to confirm that you haven't slept, please come down. Okay, here it comes, don't worry. Who is in a hurry? 5 minutes later, Louis Fu reappeared in the parking lot, and Cecile Ruan was already in Si Xiaozhen's co-pilot, closing the door tightly. When the insurance officer saw the owner of Bugatti, his attitude was obviously much better, and Si Xiaozhen, who had a split personality, twisted and signed on the side, nodding his head and secretly glancing at Louis Fu from time to time. Cecile Ruan didn't bother to care about them and took out her phone to swipe the questions. After a while, the door was suddenly opened, and a faint fur scent rushed into Cecile Ruan's nose with the surging air of the car. She looked up at Louis Fu in amazement. "What are you doing here?" Louis Fu closed the door, pressed the start button, and glanced sideways at Cecile Ruan. "The insurance company wants to drive the car away. I will help her reverse the car." "Don't they have hands?" Because the car was too close, they didn't dare. "Okay, you have Bugatti, you're awesome." Cecile Ruan immediately opened the door. "Then you let me go down first." As soon as the words fell, there was a click in the car. He locked all 4 doors. "What are you doing?" Louis Fu put his left hand on the steering wheel and his right hand on the seat, although he did not mean to get close, but the aura that seemed to be shrouded made Cecile Ruan have nowhere to hide. His unabashedly inquiring eyes lingered on Cecile Ruan's face. "Miss Ruan, do you have any opinion about me?" Almost all of his breath was in the small space, and in this dim underground parking lot, even his voice was a little more muted. Cecile Ruan shrunk into the car door. "No, how dare I have an opinion about Fu? Did you scold me in that circle of friends last night? Then you are quite self-aware." "Which one?" Louis Fu didn't speak, his eyelids lifted, meaning don't pretend with me. "Oh, you said that. It's that there are a lot of men who add me every day, and I'm also very annoyed. I just don't deny it anyway." Cecile Ruan didn't know if Louis Fu believed it. Anyway, he didn't speak, just looked at Cecile Ruan deeply. His eyes were overjoyed. Looking at each other, no one avoids it. When a strange atmosphere was spreading in the car, Louis Fu suddenly hit the steering wheel with his left hand and reversed the car without looking at the road, while his eyes were always on Cecile Ruan. "Groove." Cecile Ruan was stunned for a moment. "Are you sick all of a sudden?" Back home, Si Xiaozhen went to take a shower. Cecile Ruan changed her clothes and lay on the sofa, still feeling that something was wrong. It was Si Xiaozhen who crashed the car, but it was she who added WeChat in the end, and it was she who broke it for half a day. "How do you feel like you're being tricked?" The more she thought about it, the more angry she became, and picked up her mobile phone and sent a circle of friends. There are wild dogs in this broken community, and they are afraid of crying.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to our channel for more captivating illustrated romance audiobooks. Don't miss out on our latest releases and be part of our growing community. Hit that subscribe button and embark on an enchanting journey with us.